Before we get into speculation or surface level impressions, I want to focus on what Pearl Abyss is actually saying about Crimson Desert in a recent interview. Because a lot of the confusion around this game comes from misunderstanding how its systems fit together. In this conversation, Will Powers explains how Crimson Desert is structured, what the core design philosophy is, and why the game doesn't neatly fit into familiar labels like Souls-like or traditional RPG. And when you lay it all out, the game becomes much easier to understand. Early in the interview, the topic of dragons comes up. Will confirms that dragons are part of the game and that you do fight them. He's careful not to go into details beyond what's already been shown or discussed publicly, but the key takeaway is that dragons are integrated into gameplay systems rather than treated as a one-off narrative element. From there, the conversation quickly moves on to a more important topic: scale. Because if you've watched Crimson Desert footage, one of the first questions that comes up is just how big this game actually is. Will explains that many of the demos people have played, including large-scale showcases like Summer Game Fest, represent only a small portion of the overall world. Even moments where you can see vast landscapes or large battlefields are still just fragments of the full playable area. To put that scale into perspective, he says the playable world is at least twice the size of Skyrim's open world and larger than Red Dead Redemption 2's map. But he immediately emphasizes that size alone isn't the point. An open world only works if it's filled with things to do, systems to engage with, and reasons to interact with the environment. That idea, interaction over spectacle, comes up repeatedly throughout the interview. When discussing environmental destruction, Will makes it clear that not everything in the world is destructible. This isn't a game where every structure exists purely to collapse. Instead, destruction is intentional. If something can be broken, it's usually because it serves a gameplay function. The world is built on physics-driven interaction. Elements like fire, ice, and lightning affect the environment, and objects respond accordingly. Destruction exists as part of the problem-solving toolkit, not as a visual gimmick. That same philosophy applies to stealth and combat. Stealth is in the game and enemies have visible awareness indicators that change based on their state: patrolling, suspicious, or fully alerted. But stealth isn't mandatory. Crimson Desert is designed to give players options. You can approach encounters carefully, or you can engage directly. The game doesn't force a specific playstyle. It supports multiple approaches based on how you build your character. And that leads into one of the most important clarifications in the interview: progression. Will is very deliberate about this. He explains that Crimson Desert does not use a traditional leveling system. There's no experience bar that passively increases stats just because you repeat actions. Instead, progression is driven through skill trees and item-based unlocks. You unlock abilities by finding specific items through exploration, combat, and quests. Those items open access to skills across different categories: melee combat, ranged combat, magic, and defense, depending on what you choose to pursue. Progression is about building a toolkit, not inflating numbers. This also explains why some gameplay footage can feel overwhelming. Will points out that many demos drop players into the game with characters that are already around 60 to 70% progressed. That means a large portion of the skill set is unlocked immediately without the gradual learning curve that players would experience in a full playthrough. In the actual game, systems are introduced progressively. You unlock abilities based on your choices, and over time, those mechanics become second nature. The control complexity isn't meant to hit all at once, it's meant to grow with the player. From there, the conversation shifts to what players do outside of major combat encounters. Will explains that Crimson Desert has a wide range of non-combat systems that haven't been fully showcased yet. When you're not fighting, you're interacting with the world, harvesting resources, gathering materials, and feeding those into deeper crafting systems. Resource collection itself evolves over time. Early on, gathering might be more manual and localized. As you progress, those systems expand, allowing for larger scale resource collection and more complex crafting. The idea is that the world supports long-term engagement, not just moment-to-moment action. The interviewer also asks about the social and cultural structure of the world, and Will explains that the continent isn't a monoculture. There are multiple regions, each with different factions, values, and priorities. Some groups are opposed to certain technologies, others embrace them, and those differences create conflict within the world. Crimson Desert also includes a crime system and a wanted system, reinforcing the idea that player actions can have consequences. Will doesn't go into specifics on every possible interaction, but it's clear the systems are there to support a reactive world rather than a static one. At the core of all of this is what Will describes as the game's guiding principle: player empowerment without forced choices. Crimson Desert is built as a sandbox where players are given tools rather than instructions. The game presents problems, and it's up to the player to decide how to solve them. That applies to combat, exploration, resource gathering, and even progression itself. This philosophy also ties into how the game guides players through the world. Will explains the difference between direct guidance, things like clear quest markers, and indirect guidance where players pick up information through conversations, environmental clues, and context. Crimson Desert uses both. Sometimes the game points you clearly in a direction, other times it expects you to pay attention and decide for yourself. Exploration plays a major role here, especially with systems tied to the aerial abyss. These sky-based areas are connected to the game's story and mystery, and they include puzzles, unique challenges, and rewards that aren't strictly combat-focused. Will also mentions mechanics that help highlight points of interest in the world, encouraging discovery without constantly relying on map icons. When asked for a straightforward synopsis, Will keeps it simple. The game takes place on the continent of Pywell. You play as Cliff, a member of the Greymanes, protectors of one of the regions. A rival faction, the Black Bears, launches an invasion that fractures the existing power structure. The story revolves around reclaiming strength, reuniting allies, and uncovering the events that led to the conflict. Finally, Will addresses how Crimson Desert should be understood as a game. He says that while it may resemble a Souls-like on the surface, that comparison doesn't really hold. From an exploration and systems perspective, it's closer to something like Breath of the Wild, where mechanics interact and layer on top of each other. From a combat standpoint, it's more in line with fluid, combo-driven action games rather than methodical, punishment-focused combat. The result is a game that doesn't fit neatly into a single genre. It's an open-world action game built around systems, interaction, and player choice. And that's really the takeaway from this interview. Crimson Desert isn't trying to funnel players into one experience. It's giving them a world, a set of tools, and the freedom to decide how they want to engage with it. Once you frame it that way, a lot of the confusion around the game disappears, and what Pearl Abyss is aiming for becomes much clearer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.